Okay, we're going to work on this T-90 today, and I'm going to set up the main shaft first, just to get that out of our way. We've got our new old stock main shaft here. The other one was rusted real bad. And I want to talk about the synchronizer first. I already took the little shift plates out of it. You see them here, and they're just showing a little bit of wear. We're going to change them because they come in a small parts kit. Now, when you take out your synchronizer, you don't want to flip it around and get it in the wrong way. It is possible to put it in the wrong way. You want your collar here going forward. And you see these two different sides here. This side's kind of recessed in and flat and stuff, and this is out flush with this. Don't get that turned around either. You want this flat side that's recessed up against your second gear. So we're going to get going on that. We'll get the synchronizer set up, and then we'll load up the main shaft with some gears and put that aside while we do some other things. So you've got two synchronizer springs in here, and we're going to change these out also in case they lost their spring. Those new ones got a good amount of spring to them. And just push it down. Okay, and this one will go in on the other side. And we'll hook that in there. Hang on a second, I got somebody coming in. Let me see what's happening. Turn the camera off and be right back with you. Okay, sorry about the interruption. The guy was dropping off a T-84 for rebuild. I didn't realize he was coming this morning. But we're back at it. And we're going to assemble our synchronizer here. So if you can see in there, we've got our springs, and we've got to make sure our little shift plates, these guys right here, are hooked over. I don't know if you can see in there or not, but you got to hook them over the springs. And it could be a little tricky. There's three of them, and you just got to work it. It could be a little bit of a pain. Oh, another one fell out. But you just got to make sure you start with the three of those over the springs. Let's get that guy back in there. Takes a little bit of fussing with it. Okay, then you got to compress those one at a time and get those started. Okay, I think we got them all started there. Okay, took a little bit of fussing to get those figured out. Sometimes they can be a pain when they're new and the springs are new. It's going to be hard to show you this. I want to show you a couple things here. I don't know if you can see this. I'm trying to see it too. We've got our spring in there, and those little plates, the little lip on them has to be over the spring on both sides. It's hard to see. I hope you can see in there. So we've got one spring on this side. It's in that plate, and it circles this way and ends right here. And the other side goes in the same plate, circles around, and ends right there. So there's spring pressure on all these shift plates. It's going to keep them expanded out. And remember, this is the back side that goes up against second gear, and this is the front. And you've got your, that wasn't in the camera. This is the back side, goes up against second gear, and here's your front piece. This goes to the front, and that's what we got. Okay, so now we got that set up, and let me try and get you back in on the bench here. Okay, we'll set up that main shaft now. Okay, so these are parts that we're not going to use. I'll just put those off to the side. Okay, here's our main shaft. This is the back. This is the front. And this takes your input shaft here with some needle bearings in there. So, we're just going to load first gear on there. And this is a new old stock first gear. And it's sliding perfectly. From the front, we're going to add second gear on there, and it's a new old stock gear also. It's got the bushing in there. The bushings can go bad on a used gear, and a lot of times second gear will be okay, but your synchronizer, little nubs here, will be all worn off. If you have trouble with the transmission popping out of second gear, oops, it's usually because these guys are worn off real bad, and the synchronizer unit can't catch and hold it real good. So don't just inspect the gear surface when you got a problem with popping out a second. It's usually right here, or you've got a bad bushing inside. So second gear is on. Now we get a blocking ring. These are also new old stock blocking rings. The originals weren't terrible, but Vin got them for me, so we're going to use them. And here's the thing, when you're putting these together, if you're just not careful and stuff, and you push that too tight, that can actually lock up on there, and you won't be able to shift. It's kind of crazy, but if you get it too tight now and you wedge it down there, it won't release. You'll have to go in there with a screwdriver and release it. So I'm going to take just a little bit of trans assembly lube, and we're going to smear it around here. And we're going to carefully put on our blocking ring. That adds a little bit of lubrication, keeps them from jamming up on you. Okay, here's our synchronizer. And it's happened more than once. So many times guys will put these in backwards. I can't stress it enough to make sure you take this out correctly and you put it back in correctly. You could take that inner hub and accidentally spin it around in there, and then everything will just be too long. The common problem I see on T-90 rebuilds is people put that in backwards. And there was a time when there was a company, one of the bigger companies down there in Georgia there, you know, they're selling a lot of junk. They were actually selling these, and they were assembled backwards from the factory. They didn't even realize it. And I do so much T-90 work that I told them about it, and you know, they didn't really care. It's just there's a couple Jeep outfits out there that you know, I don't use their parts anymore, and they're just not good people in general. You know, they're just hard to deal with. But anyway, be very careful with your synchro hub and sleeve and everything. Make sure your 3 notches here go into your shift plates. Okay, so you're going to put this on. Hope you can see this okay. You're going to put this on lightly. and you're going to move your blocking ring around till it engages, and you slide the whole thing back. And you see we're right here at the snap ring slot, so we know everything's working right. Let me dig through the small parts to get the snap ring, and we'll get that put on. Okay, I dug out the snap ring, and here's the snap ring pliers I like to use. See how the jaws kind of open up nice and straight. You know, snap rings could be a pain, but good snap ring pliers will help you out. Well, we're halfway. Okay, once your snap ring goes on, make sure it's seated in the groove real good. All around there, make sure it's seated in there nice. And that one looks perfect. So, here's our main shaft. Make sure second gear's turning on that blocking ring. That's why I put that lube in there. Don't let that get jammed up on you. First gear, you remember we built that jig to hold all our parts, and that keeps your parts lined up so that you don't take first gear, turn around, and have the shift collar there facing backwards. So it helps from the beginning keep your parts straight. And one of the first Jeeps I was ever building when I was, I don't know, had to be 30-something years ago. I think I was probably about 14 years old. Didn't have the tools to take my first transmission apart. Sent it off to a Jeep guy to let him build it, and he put first gear on backwards. And from that point on, you know, I got so pissed off at that because you're supposed to be a professional. But put this on backwards, and I wound up taking it apart, and I think I've been building transmissions since I was 14. Just because, you know, it's hard to get good quality work out there. But anyway, I'm rambling on today. There's our main shaft. It's all set up and ready to go. We're just going to put this aside, and we're going to work on your cluster gear here. I don't think you can see it. We're going to work on the cluster gear next. So we're just going to put that to the side. It's ready to go in when we're ready. Okay, here we are. We're getting set up to put the needle bearings in our cluster gear there. And this is a spacer that goes down in the middle. And on most T-90s you're going to have 6 washers. You're going to have your tube, a washer, needle bearings, a washer, needle bearings, and a washer. On some early T-90s, early 2As and stuff like that, this tube is going to be longer, and you're only going to have 4 of these. So if you take a transmission apart and you only have 4 of those, don't just buy a tube if yours is messed up, or take a tube from another one. There's 2 different lengths here. So just be aware of that. If you have 4 washers instead of 6, make sure you use the same tube. If you buy a regular tube, they don't make the longer one anymore, and what you'll get is the short one, and you'll need 6 of those. They interchange as long as you have everything right. If you have the long tube and 4 of them, that's fine. If you want to switch it to a short tube and 6 thrust washers, that's fine too. Just be aware of that so you don't mess that up in there. Okay, next you have 88 needle bearings. So there's inside there you'll have 22, and then a washer, then another 22, and washer. So you'll have 44, 44 with your spacer in the middle. So if you don't have transmission assembly lube, you can use petroleum jelly. It breaks down fast when it hits the oil. Don't use grease. It's just doesn't break down fast enough. So you want assembly lube if you can get it. And like I say, hardware stores and all kinds of places and auto stores used to sell it. Even Napa I don't think has it anymore. You got to order it. Again, it's the blue stuff, and you can get this ATP brand from Summit Racing. You get that online. And it's the good stuff. I've been using this for years, and a tub will last you forever. You don't use very much on a transmission or transfer case or something. So start with some good transmission assembly lube, and you'll save yourself a lot of headache. Okay, this is my, I guess you'd call it a dummy shaft. Stick in there, put your needle bearings around it, holds everything in shape. If you got good assembly lube, you don't necessarily need this. I do it with or without, depending on how things are going, but you put that in there and your needle bearings will go all around there, and they're easy to set up, and it's not a bad way to do it, and sometimes I do it that way, sometimes I don't. So I like to grab the old shaft. We got a new one. This one started to get some wear on it. Just prop it under there so it's kind of level, and then we can start loading things up. So we're going to send our tube in first, and then on that tube there's going to be a washer. We're going to stick that to the tube just to make things easier. So now we're going to set up our first row of bearings. We're going to give this a wiping of assembly lube. Okay, you can't mess this up. You can't really put too many in there because it won't allow it. You could put too few, and you don't want to do that. So count them as you're putting them in there, and you're going to put 22 in there. Every now and again, squeeze them up against the side. Make sure they're in there. Kind of like watching paint dry, I know, but we want to get these in there right. So when you're doing it, just don't get aggravated or anything. Just take your time. You want to get these in there right. Don't have enough assembly lube there. And you put it where you need it. Okay, so when you get that last one in there, kind of like putting a keystone in something. Now they're in there, and they're not going to fall out. You have that completely full. Oh, lost our tube, but you have that full. So like I say, you don't actually need that this guy right here. And we'll just push that spacer in there again. You don't actually need that, but if you bang it around and stuff, you could actually screw it up. So we'll stick it in later. It's easier for you to see stuff without it in there right now. So now we're going to send another washer in there, and we'll just put some lube on it to keep everything glued together. Okay, and then we're going to slide that forward. We'll just take this guy, we're going to slide that forward. Okay, get ourselves enough room to put another layer of bearings in. Again, we're going to put some of that lube in there. and this is sticky enough to hold everything in place, but it also has lubrication capability, so you're not, you know, starting anything dry. Not that you would, because you're going to fill it with lube first, but that initial startup just provides some lubrication. Okay, let's get another 22 of these in there. Okay, I think you get the gist of how these go in. I don't want to make this a super long video. But you're basically just going to put those in. Then we're going to put another washer on there to cap everything off. So, just so I don't bore you to death putting all these needle bearings in. That's the process. I'm going to get these finished here, and I'll send them some in from the other side. We'll get all 88 in, and then I'll come back and show you where we're headed next. Okay, there's our gear, and it's got all the needle bearings in it. And you could turn this around and do whatever you want to do with it. You gotta be gentle with it, but that's with no shaft in there. Now, when we put it in the case, just because we're going to be banging it around, we'll put this in just to show you how to do it. If it's your first time through, you might feel safer with the shaft in there after you've done a bunch of them. So that's just slide right in and right out. No needle bearings came out. Like I say, they're in there. They're in there very good when you put the final one in. And if it's your first one, it's a good idea to use that. You'll feel more confident and stuff. But after you've done hundreds of them, you could just stick them in there and go. It's not critical you have that shaft. That shaft that I have is a piece of Delrin. It's just basically black plastic, and it works good. You can make it out of anything, a piece of steel, whatever. Just make it a thousandths or two under 3/4. You know, 749, 748.5, something like that. Make it as long as your gear, and you'll be pretty good. You'll be able to load up all your bearings without any trouble. Spacers in there are 6 washers, are 88 needle bearings. That's loaded up and ready to go. I don't need this anymore. Okay, let me get the case out front here and try and get the camera on that. Show you what I'm going to do with that. Okay, there's the case on its side, and we had a very good reverse idler, so we're leaving that in there. Here's your thrust washers. It might be hard to see. I don't know if you could see in there or not. There's a little cutout here in the front. There's your thrust washer. It's got a little bump out on it. That gets locked in right there so it can't swivel. This guy has got the 2 little bump outs here. Hooks right into these little grooves right on your cluster gear. And then there's a little spacer here. So this runs like this. Now, we're not going to get into it too deep right now, but I just want to tell you guys about lubricating a transmission transfer case. Your original thrust washers, they weren't steel backed like these, and even these with the coating on them, regular 80-90 weight modern stuff, modern lube, is going to eat this stuff off here. And you can't have any type of lube with an extreme pressure additive in there. Those are they got a sulfur base to them, and they get hot, they start attacking non-ferrous metal. They'll eat these immediately. I mean, there'll just be nothing left to them. Next thing you know, your cluster gear is shucking back and forth in there, and you're going to have a real problem. I do have the correct lube for these. We're going to talk about it a little bit more in detail. I spent a lot of time with a lubrication company getting the correct lube for these. I have it. I'm going to show you when I put it in here. It has no extreme pressure additives. It doesn't have a sulfur base. It's thick as it's supposed to be. It slows the gears down. You could easily shift it to first and reverse. But there's a whole lot to get into about lubrication. So just let me tell you guys, if you're rebuilding one of these, do not put regular modern gear oil in it if it has extreme pressure additives. It's just not right. It's gonna beat up your blocking rings real bad and almost disintegrate them. Don't put that in there. It's just going to give you trouble. So we're going to go ahead and get these stuck on there, and we're going to set our gear in there, and I'll get set up for that next. Okay, we've got our thrust washers kind of glued there into the case with some of that assembly lube. We've got this thrust washer on the back of our cluster gear, and we're going to go set that in now. I think I'm getting in the way here. But, just going to drop that in there. Okay. Now, that's sitting at the bottom of the case now, and we're going to leave it there out of the way for a little bit. And I'll show you how we get the shaft through that, but that'll be later in the rebuild. So right now we've got our main shaft done. This blocking ring is for the input gear. Got to get our bearing on the input gear now, and we'll get that done over at the press. And we'll get ready to put the main shaft, the input shaft in there, and rear bearing and stuff like that. But let me do a little bit of a cleanup here, and I'll be back with you in just a bit. Hey everybody, we're back again this morning. It's Monday. We got a bunch of snow over the weekend, so I didn't get to that T-90. But we're going to try and get to it today. I don't know, 10 inches or so of new snow. About 8 degrees out this morning, but let's head in the shop. Sun's coming up, and let's get going on that T-90. Should be nice and warm in there by now. Okay, we got a good fire going, and nice and toasty in here, about 70 degrees, so we can get going on that T-90 with no trouble. I can't ever let that fire go out in here, you know. I've got a couple 100,000 pounds of iron in there, and there's my big iron worker. Can't let that guy get cold. When things get cold, it takes forever to warm them back up again. So that stove's going 24 hours a day all winter long, and got to keep all the machines warm in here. But let's head over to the bench. Everything should be toasty warm, and we'll get going on that T-90. Okay guys, in the last video we've got our main cluster gear loaded up with the needle bearings and sitting in the case, and we got our main shaft loaded up with first gear, second gear, and a synchronizer, and that's right here. There'll be another blocking ring in the front, and here's our input shaft, and we've got to get the bearing on there. I'll get the bearing out, and then I want to show you a few things about the bearing in the front of the case. So let me get that out now, and then and we'll see what's going on with that. Okay guys, here's the front of the case. This is what your your input shaft goes right in there. Here's the oil collector, the front cap. You got a seal. I've got a sealed bearing here that we're going to use. And there's a bunch of stuff we're going to talk about here. First of all, it's the oil collector. Some guys pull them out, some guys leave them in. It does no harm to leave it in. Later T-90s, I've taken apart real late 3Bs and 5s and stuff, and at some point they deleted this. They found out it was not necessary. This doesn't hurt to be in there. There's not a big benefit to it being in there either, and they realized that later on down the road. You could keep it in or leave it out. This is where it bolts, and these are threaded. These are threaded right in here, and it would bolt in right here and go around your cluster gear down there, and it would bring oil up to your input gear. They found out it wasn't necessary, so it was deleted, and some cases are going to have them, some cases are not. If you choose to take it out of there, you've got to plug up these holes so you don't have a massive oil leak there. You can nut and bolt it, safety wire and put Loctite on them. You could thread that hole and just put a bolt in from this side with some sealer on it. Whatever you do, if you take it out, plug up those holes. Now here's your cap, and this little guy right here was for if any oil got past your bearing and was starting to come out the shaft, it would go in your cap and would drain back in that hole. Now there's a lot of companies selling sealed bearings and stuff, and what they do is they'll give you the sealed bearing, they'll give you a plug for that, you'll plug that up, and you'll put your sealed bearing in. I use a sealed bearing. I don't think an open bearing is a good way to go, because it does put a lot of oil out there, and this was your only way of sealing. This went up against here. It's just a piece of felt. It got saturated. Oil wound up going down through there, dripped out the front, and you have a leaky transmission. The thing with sealed bearings is there's only so much grease in there, and I always get concerned about how long they're going to last. So let's take a peek inside this one. Let's see if I can get this seal out of here. Okay, that's what's inside that bearing. It's a very good grease they use, and I don't know, is it going to be there 50 years later? I don't know. I've had some trouble in the past with sealed bearings, especially when they use on other vehicles sealed bearing pilot bearings. I've had those things go bad on me. I don't care for it. So what I do, I leave that hole open. I take out the inner seal there, and I put this in like this. Okay, so now you have all the benefits of the sealed bearing, but you're still getting full lubrication on the back side. If anything does get through, it won't be such a massive amount where it could get collected in this and kind of spill around in there, go down that slot and back into the case. That's how I like to do it. You got to decide for yourself what you want to do. We're still going to put this was in from the factory, you know, this oil slinger here, and it went on there, and it did a fair job of keeping direct oil away from the original open bearing. We're still going to put that in, and you can see we're going to have a little sneak path in there, so that bearing is going to get fully lubricated. It'll go in there, it'll slosh around in there, it'll always be there, and it'll drip out as it needs to and go in as it needs to. There'll always be oil there, and that's what I like about taking half of the seal off. I just don't trust that that's going to be there long enough, you know. And then, I mean, it's not really fun pulling your transmission out just for a front bearing. You know, I've got vehicles, I've got my 46 CJ2A, never been pulled apart. It's an unrestored original Jeep, and there's no trouble with that one. You can imagine if one of these bearings had been in for 60 years, that grease is probably going to be all dried up and caked up and not going to be there, and that'll start howling on you. So that's how I do it. You could choose to do it that way or another way. It's entirely up to you. Just want to give you some information. Like I say, leave that hole open if you do it this way. If you put the oil collector in, put some sealant on your bolts, stick them in there, keep your oil collector. And if you want to pull it out, just make sure there's no chance of anything, if you nut and bolt that, of a nut falling out. You could safety wire them or whatever. Just make sure there's no chance of anything falling out and getting in your gears, because that'll mess things up in a hurry. Okay, so what we're going to do, head over to the press. We're going to put this on first, then our bearing. I'm going to press that on, get our snap ring on there. So we'll have that guy and then that guy. Now this is kind of, it's got a little flange in there, and when you put this on, this part here is raised out. That's the part that goes up against the bearing. It doesn't go the other way, because then it'd be tight and you won't get oil in there. So that's dished down. That goes right up against your bearing. Get that started, and then we're going to go over to the press, and I'm going to press that on now. I can't really get the camera in the press real good, but it's just, you know, we're just pressing a bearing on. There's no science there. So let me get that pressed on. I'll be right back, and we'll start assembling this thing. Okay, I just went and pressed that bearing on. Put the snap ring in there. Make sure that that's seated in the groove real good. And you can see we're just going to have a little bit of a sneak path for oil through there. It's going to be able to flow in, come back out, and keep moving around in there, fully lubricating that bearing, but not running through the front. And like I say, you can keep it sealed up or not. It's up to you. This is how I do it, and it's worked very good. I've got transmissions in service for, you know, 30 years that are still going good with this particular setup. But it's entirely up to you. This is what I like to do. Okay, now we're going to take our assembled main shaft, and we're going to get that in there. And we're going to make sure that blocking ring there is free. Remember I told you that one could get jammed up. So that slides right in there. And we still have that cluster gear sitting down in the case. So everything's very easy to assemble right now. You don't want to pick that up until later. Some guys do, and then they fight putting that main shaft in. It's just not necessary. I'll show you the way I do it, and the way the Willys mechanics did it way back when, and we'll get this figured out. Okay, we've got this blocking ring. We're going to put some assembly lube on here. We're going to stick it right in here. Make sure our cutouts here align with our shifting plates. We'll get that kind of stuck in there for now. Then we're heading in with here. We've got to load this up with our needle bearings. Okay, you see we've got our blocking ring in there. Main shaft is staring right at us. Got our blocking ring in. We've got some assembly lube on there, and it's going to stay right there. And now we're going to go and we're going to load up our input shaft with the bearings. Let me dig those out of the small parts kit, and I'll show you how we do that. Okay, we'll take a good amount of assembly lube, and we'll get it right in the bore there. And then we'll just start loading our needle bearings in there. dropped one in there. Okay, I think you guys can see that all right. Yeah, we're just loading up the bearings in there. So, like we did on the bottom, I know it's boring, you know, like watching paint dry, loading needle bearings in. So, I'll finish that up and then come back with you. Okay, so we've got our needle bearings loaded up, assembly lube. We've got a little bit over here so it doesn't tighten up on the blocking ring. And there's not a good camera angle I have here, but basically you're just going to take your main shaft snout, make sure it carefully goes in the needle bearings, and we've got to get that oil slinger in the right place while we have the chance. Okay. Now we just got to tap this bearing in lightly, and then we'll have everything basically assembled. Make sure everything's in place. Oil slinger looks good. We're spinning okay. Close up my lube here. Okay, now this is just a light fit in here, so we're just gonna tap it. You shouldn't be beating on that or anything. It's just you're just driving it in. Light taps. And you want to get it so your snap ring here is tight up against the case. Okay. Alright, now we got that in place. We're going to get some parts off our rack there, and we're going to start supporting the back and get the back bearing in. So let me get this switched around, grab some parts, and I'll show you what the back end's going to look like. Okay, I've got the transmission turned around. You're looking at the back side that bolts up against the transfer case. You got your bearing plate, and that just fits in that machine surface there. Sometimes those are loose, sometimes they're tight. No big deal. Just get it seated. Don't forget your spacer here. Your bearing has to sit up against that. Okay. There's the original bearing, and it's kind of chunky in there. You can feel some grit. We've got a new one. And no snap ring or anything. This one just goes right on here, and we'll just tap that on till it's seated in there, and then we'll come around the front again and we'll put the cap on, and I think we'll be getting close to having that done. Let me get that bearing tapped on there. And again, that's not crazy. You don't go beating that thing on. I'll show you what we do with that cluster gear down the bottom. So I get the bearing on, I'll flip it around, we'll button the front up, and then we'll put this shaft through, and I'll show you how that goes. Okay, we're going to pick up the oil slinger and put that in first. And from the factory, these bolts came with like a copper sealing washer there. And when you get your new small parts kit, they give you these fiber washers. And what happens with these is they lose, you'll torque that down, these will squish, you'll lose your torque, your bolts will become loose, and then everything starts going to hell. I don't use those. I leave the original copper ones on, or if they're bad, I get new ones. And I take a little bit of our thread sealant that we've been using the whole time through doing everything, and I rely on a thread sealant and not that copper washer to do the sealing. But that copper washer won't lose its torque like the fiber ones do. So we'll go in there and we'll pick that up and see if we can get it caught. Feels pretty good. I'll just get one loosely in there. Okay. A little more sealant for the bottom one. Okay, we won't take those down tight yet. We'll just check, make sure there's no interference with that. Sometimes you got to tweak it, but this one feels good, and that'll carry oil right up to our input shaft like original. So we'll get those torqued down, and then I've got the cap here. I just took a tiny bit of gasket sealant to glue that on there. And there's really only one way it can go on. That's for your clutch fork. And you've got your drain back in right there. Make sure that hole is clean. That's going to go on next. So we'll get that put on next. Okay guys, I got that prepped up and ready to go. I like to take the seal and put a little grease against it on the side that hits the cap here. Just so it's kind of smooth when it fires up. A little grease inside the cap there won't hurt. And we've got sealant on our bolts. We'll just get those started evenly. And one thing you got to be aware of when you put this cap on is that snap ring on that front bearing. Depending on which manufacturer you use, sometimes those snap rings can be pretty wide, and if it holds your cap up from seating perfectly, to put the original snap ring on there. I forget which, there was a brand I was using. I think it was SKF bearings. They have a very wide snap ring on them, and this cap won't go on properly. So just be aware of that. Just try it out and make sure that it fits right, and this goes all the way back. You don't want that held up there. It'll screw up your whole installation. So we'll just get these snug down. And I know you're still wondering about that cluster gear. We don't have that in there yet. We're going to get to that. I'll get these torqued down and we'll do that next. Okay, there's our transmission. We still got to get this shaft in there. And I'm sure if you've seen some videos on the T-90, you'll see guys looping wires around there and picking it up and trying to get everything lined up that way. And you know, there's a bunch of videos out there, I'm sure. I've seen a couple of them, and I've watched some guys rebuild them and struggle with that cluster gear. The way it was done back in the dealerships long ago, and the way some tranny shops do it, is you just take your case, flip it right over. I don't know if you heard that, but a little clunk, and the cluster gear dropped right into place. And we'll just make sure our washers are free, and that sets it perfectly. And we could take our shaft, we could run it through now. That newspaper's kind of wrinkling on me. Let's see if we can get this done. Damn it, hang in there. I'll put it right on the bench. Okay. Just make sure your washers are in good shape. And take your shaft. Be conscious of your groove because that has to line up with the reverse gear. Okay, and this is going to go in from the back. And you just got to make sure your washers are in place there. And just got to move that one just a little bit. Okay, I'll try and get you in there. Yeah, right about there. Okay. Now remember we got our dummy shaft in there. And if we can get that coming through smoothly, we'll be in good shape. I'll give it a little tap. Okay, our shaft is coming through. And I like to make that snug. This is what the, if this was a little bit smaller, it would just slide right through. But I like to make it snug so that it doesn't just come flying out of there. Okay. Now, let me see if I got you in there. Okay, this last little bit here, you can still spin this. Okay? Now you've got your groove there, you got your groove here. And, oh, let me get that in there. These have to line up and they're going to catch a plate. Let me show you the original plate. Here it is. Okay. Here's the original plate. That catches both of these grooves, locks that in place. I'm going to show you a couple different plates and a couple different things to be careful of. Let me get some stuff out and I'll show you a few things before we send that home. Okay, here's a plate that came out of the transmission. And sometimes when you get a small parts kit, you'll get new plates. And there's one style. I think that's the same. This one's a little bit different. This is the one I like to use. But you got to be careful of here. So here's your gasket here. Okay. You can't have the plate anywhere in where that gasket is. If you have it there and it's where the gasket is, it's not going to sit in the hole of the transfer case. They're not going to come together. And you'll know it right away because oil will come pouring out. More than one guy has called me up with a problem, says he can't stop the leak between them. This is always the case. Make sure that this plate falls within your gasket. Okay, that's absolutely critical. And then when you put your transfer case on there, everything's going to seal nice on that gasket, and everything's going to be wonderful. So that's just another little tip. I like to change them out when I do it. This one's been in there and it's starting to get a little messed up right there. And when I do it, I take this little guy, actually I take it like this, put that little guy in there, and it's small enough. These big ones, I don't know, they were coming in some kits. I don't know why they were so big. I wind up trimming them. Don't be afraid to trim that if you need to. Just make sure it's not in the way of your transfer case. Okay, so let me get that set up, and I'll show you where we're at from there. Okay, we've got our plate in. Our tube is just hanging on by a thread there. And if you don't get any needle bearings coming out with that, you know you did it right. So we pushed our tube through, replaced it with that shaft, and all our needle bearings are in perfect shape. We didn't have to fuss with wires or trying to get anything kind of lined up. Just flip it over and send it through. That's a little trick for you. Okay, we've got our plate in. Here's a preview of our gasket on here. That's what that needs to look like. It's not anywhere on the gasket. Now that's going to fit nice in the pocket. These shafts aren't going to go anywhere. Everything's good. And that's your basic T-90 rebuild. And I'm going to try and get you, maybe I can lay it down. Okay, I think I can lay it down. Make sure at this point that your second gear is going to spin. See, that's tough to spin. Just make sure that blocking ring is not biting onto it. Make sure your bearing's there. Just make sure that's not biting onto it. You see, I don't like the way that feels there. And we want second gear to spin. And that blocking ring's got a hold of it. That's what I was talking about. Sometimes from the banging around, it could sometimes get a hold of that. And same on the front one. You want everything to be spinning freely. Okay, see, now that's spinning freely. That blocking ring is going faster than the second gear there. See how that's working out? You want everything free at this point. Okay, our input shaft is turning free. I hope I'm not in the way here. Everything is spinning free now. You don't want to get locked up on those blocking rings like I was talking about. Okay, that's where it sits. Now we got lucky on our top here. It didn't need anything. If you need to take these apart and change out some of the springs or whatever, or if it's in bad shape, these normally don't go bad. You want to look for wear on these. You know, if you had a guy that always had his hand on the shifter and he was always resting this against the gear, these will wear out. Don't rest your hand on the shifter. That's what happens. These wear, they go like nothing. But if you had to, it's got these roll pins in there, and you drive them out, and you pull your shafts out. Make sure you put your caps back if you have to rebuild this. Ours is in very nice shape. We don't have to do any rebuilding on this, but we're not going to put it down right now. It's going to be easier to put the lube in without this on, so we'll just kind of rest it there and put a couple bolts in to hold it. And I'll show you when we lube that, the lube we use, and how we get that in there easily. So that's where we're at on the T-90, and I think we can get it hooked up to the transfer case. I'll get the bolts cleaned up and get ready to get that mounted to the transfer case, and we'll have one unit. Okay, that's what's coming next. Okay, you can see I got the transfer case flipped up, resting on a 4x4. Got a gasket just tacked down with a little bit of gasket sealer, and there's the transmission, and we're going to mate the two. I hope I can get this in a good position for you to see. That's how I like to do it when I'm on the bench. I like to flop the transfer case kind of on edge there. Okay, I think you'll be able to see this. I'm just going to take our T-90 and hold the bearing so it doesn't fall out, and just lay it right on there. Just got to get that bearing started in the hole there. I'm going to have to get a little hammer and tap that down. Hang on. Okay, sometimes they can be a little bit of a bear to get started, but that one dropped down nice. It's just the bearing in the case, so you have to seat that in perfectly. And remember our bolts here. I've got new lock washers on our bolts. And remember, we got the two shorties. We got two short ones here. And if you've been following along, you know there's a couple places we need short ones. And I'm going to put a little bit of sealer on these, because they do go into the case. And we've got a new lock washer. And one of them, let me see if you can see in there. Hang in there with me. It'd be easier if somebody was working the camera, but I don't have that luxury. Okay, so this guy here, remember, there's your intermediate shaft, and you got your intermediate gear there, so you need a short bolt there. You don't want to hit the gear. So that gets a short bolt, and the next short bolt, as you remember, is going through here, so that you don't hit your cluster gear in the transmission. So we'll goop that one up. And that one's going to go in there. Okay, there's our short bolts taken care of. And they have to go in those positions. Put a long one in there, you're going to get yourself in trouble. Okay, these are just the regular factory bolts that came out. In there. Oh, this doesn't need any sealer because it goes in there. We'll put a little bit of oil on that one. And that one goes into the case there, so we'll put some sealer. Okay, we got all our bolts started almost. Let me just get this one in, put a little bit of oil on the threads. And it's going right into this location. Okay, just going to snug those up and give them some final torque after that. And then we'll flop that whole thing down, and I'll show you where we're at. Okay, be right back with you. Okay guys, here's our finished T-90 attached to our completed Model 18 transfer case. And when you guys are shifting these things, here's your first and reverse. And that's just a straight cut gear, so when you're going into first or reverse, you're just kind of sliding that gear, come to a complete stop, and on first and reverse when you're putting it in, so you save that gear. And then second and third right here, there's second there, and then your input shaft to be third, so they're synchronized, so no big deal. But there it is. And we're probably going to go for the overdrive next. I think I'll probably get this in some epoxy primer before we go with the overdrive. And the overdrive is coming next though. So I hope you guys enjoyed the rebuild of these. And if you did, hit the like button, subscribe, send me a comment, let me know how you think it's going. And I guess we'll see you on the next one. I appreciate you watching, and hope somebody got something out of this on their own rebuild. And if anybody's stuck, just give me a shout and see if we can get you through it. Okay, I think I pretty much fully explained it, but I'd like to hear from you if you have any trouble. We'll try and help you along. Okay, thanks again for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.